Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with my unit tier list for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires for Slaanesh. Now, Slaanesh is a melee-focused race, though they do have some ranged options available. And it's all about speed. There are a bunch of units over here that are very much glass cannon units that can do a high amount of damage, have a good amount of speed, but they can also die very, very quickly. So when you're playing a Slaanesh campaign, you have to be careful about that specific situation. It used to be that Slaanesh didn't have any way of improving casualty replenishment. Now they do for the Druki Anointed, but even so, when you look at Slaaneshi campaigns, you're looking at the situation where you get a ton of heroes and a ton of options at tier 3, but not necessarily so much until that point. So you're going to have to be careful early on, especially as you have limited recruitment slots for that critical early portion of a campaign. So starting with Devoted Marauders of Slaanesh, they're all F tier. They are not worth recruiting. They are generally the worst marauders to recruit in a campaign for a number of reasons. They're very weak, and yes, and they're not necessarily weaker than other marauders, but if you look at marauders, think of Marauders of Nurgle. They have durability. Marauders of Tzeentch, again, durability. Marauders of Khorne can do some damage, but even then, for those races, you generally don't want to recruit Marauders, or ever, because you have better options. Whereas with Slaanesh, you have a significantly better option, and given the kind of playstyle that Slaanesh has, limited options, especially with regards to siege, range being limited for a good portion of the campaign, it is really not worth investing whatsoever in Marauders, especially because you can recruit Demonettes at the same tier. And out of these two units, this is kind of the one situation where mortal units are worth it far more than demonic units. So with Demonettes, they are an A tier unit. Now, normally, I would not put demonic units so high up on a tier list, especially the baseline version, because of auto-resolve concerns and damage concerns. But Demonettes can do so much damage and close the gap so quickly that they will destroy your early game opponents with ease, which is not something, by the way, that you can necessarily say about Bloodletters. Yes, Bloodletters do have a lot of advantages, but they're more equipped to deal with heavy infantry. Whereas Demonettes, they're more equipped to deal with pretty much everything in an early game situation. Well, maybe not Lizardmen. But all the same, if you're fighting High Elves, if you're fighting Marcus Wolfheart, hell, even if you're fighting Jan Bo, Demonettes are just going to do a really good job, just overrun the enemy force. They're not going to do so well in auto-resolve, but against pretty much any early game opponent, you're just going to steamroll over them with Demonettes. And especially if you're playing the Mask and can give them extra armor, that extra durability really makes them a far more worthwhile unit to pick up early on in your campaign. Then Exalted Demonettes, S tier unit, without the discussion on the subject, I think. The reason, especially like I'm thinking about the Mask, but in general, Exalted Demonettes are just really solid units. Keep in mind, a lot of the fights we have at a relevant point in the campaign is against chaff. It's against low tier units that don't necessarily have a high level of durability. But you might fight a lot of those armies, and they might have a lot of ranged options. Like with Demonettes, they close the gap, they're more durable, they do more damage, they're just flat out better. So this is the one exception to the rule of the baseline demon units, like be it regular ones or exalted ones, where I'd really recommend, especially, again, as the Mask. As the Kala and Nakari, different situation, especially as Nakari. As the Kala, you can definitely use Demonettes and Exalted Demonettes. Who's going to stop you, really? Cafe is not going to stop you. Gelt is not going to stop you. The Lizardmen, again, different situation, but still you can't pick up that fight. Then we have Slangors, the Gores of Slaanesh. Yeah, I'm not really fond of Slangors. They're okay, they're better than Devoted Marauders, much better than Devoted Marauders, but I think these are the least useful of the gore units. I mean, Pestigore, Corngore, Sangors especially, do have their uses in a battle situation. Slangors, they're just pretty mediocre as far as units are concerned in a Slaaneshi campaign, especially for the Slaaneshi playstyle. They're just not good enough. They don't necessarily mesh well with that. They're neither durable or fast enough to justify bringing them. Like, if you look at Pestigores, they have that speed. If you look at Corngores, they have a decent level of durability. If you look at Sangors, they can be pretty solidly durable in a siege campaign. But Slangors, yeah, they're just really not worthwhile as units. Then we have Forsaken of Slaanesh, and I'm going to put Forsaken in S tier. Here are the reasons why. One, they're Forsaken, and thus they're available to recruit early on, specifically tier 2. Which means that in any campaign that you're playing as Slaanesh, you can get quite a few of these very early on. And they can pretty much deal with anything that comes your way. On top of that, they're actually durable. Not only do they do a decent amount of damage, yes, Demonettes do have them beat on that, but their far higher level of durability means that, especially against High Elves, if you're playing the car, you just want to get a bunch of Forsaken. If you're playing the Kala, if you're playing the Mask, a different situation, but even then, it's hard to argue against Forsaken. Partly because of availability, partly because of combat capability, and they do end up working well with the Mark of Slaanesh. Like, with Forsaken, my perspective is Siege really benefits from Forsaken because they're similarly really good there, and durable, even more durable. And then Slaanesh, of course, benefits partly because of a lack of other options. Like, if you want an infantry that can hold the line, Demonettes will destroy the line, but won't necessarily hold it as well, then Forsaken of Slaanesh are a really, really good choice. For Khorne, Forsaken are not bad, nor are they bad for Nurgle, far from it. It's just those races have much better options available, especially if you're talking about Khorne as like Cast Warriors or Forsaken. Yeah, I think I'd go with Cast Warriors with halberds or dual weapons versus Forsaken, let alone Chosen at tier 3. Then we have Spawn of Slaanesh. Honestly, I'm just gonna say Spawn of Slaanesh is just kind of a worthless unit. In general, these kind of entity units, they're either really solid as trolls or they're not really as good. Trolls are phenomenal because they're great line breakers, line holders, they're great in the siege. Spawn, they just don't have that kind of combat excellence that you might see with things like trolls, any kind of troll, really, in the game. Then we have the big greater demon of Slaanesh. I'm just gonna put it in B tier. So when we look at the exalted, the greater demons of Slaanesh, the unit version, or the exalted, the greater demons of any race, the question is this unit really going to make a significant impact on the battlefield given the tier requirements for these kind of units? And with most other demons, like with Bloodthirsters or Grey Unclean ones, not really. With the Keeper of Secrets, absolutely so. So with Keeper of Secrets, they are phenomenally good big single entity units. They're fast, they do a lot of damage, they're honestly a terrifying thing to face on the battlefield, which I can't necessarily say the same about Bloodthirsters, but I can say it about them. About the Keeper of Secrets of Slaanesh. They are the only greater demon unit that actually lives up to that name. Like, just sheer durability, sheer combat capability, sheer damage capability. They are really solid and they do make a difference. So if you want a big single entity, I would put them even higher if not for the tier requirements. Then we have Champions of Slaanesh. Excellent monstrous infantry unit, like the equivalent of Wrathmongers, if you will, for Slaanesh. Wrathmongers are the better unit. And Slaanesh does, again, suffer from the fact that they're not Khorne and thus don't have access to the insane level of growth that Khorne has. But at the same time, still really good units, elite infantry, and you do want an elite infantry unit that can really tear things up and have a level of durability, which Exalted Demonists do not have. So that's kind of like they're the ultimate infantry option for Slaanesh. They are an investment. They won't be useful at the relevant point in a campaign that prevents them from being an S tier. Like, play a Khorne campaign, you realistically will get Wrathmongers, or can, when it's relevant, even despite the fast pace of Khorne campaigns. Play a Slaaneshi campaign, not quite as much with Champions of Slaanesh. Then we have Soul Grinders of Slaanesh. Soul Grinders are either really useful, in the case of, say, Nurgle, or they're just mediocre or useless. And that's the case for Slaanesh. Like, if you want big single entities as Slaanesh, you got a really great option, or multiple great options. But the Soul Grinder just really isn't that specific option in a campaign, so I don't really think it's worthwhile. Then we obviously have more units available, like the Praeton. And with the Praeton, I'm also going to put it in B tier. It's a pretty solid single entity monster. It is available earlier on than the Keeper of Secrets, but all the same, just tier requirements, relevancy. If it had better siege capability, if it was more useful in sieges, definitely. Still, it does bring a capability in a Slaanesh campaign that is lacking otherwise. So I would recommend getting Praetons if you can. Like, Keeper of Secrets Praetons, definitely worth it. Unlike, say, Chaos Furies of Slaanesh. I know, they're fast. I know, Furies can give you mobility on the battlefield, can close the gap, and can harass enemy ranged units. But look at the Slaanesh playstyle. The way you deal with ranged and artillery and all that is you just have such fast units that you can close the gap anyway, and you have such incredible flankers in general that, usually speaking, when you're playing a Slaanesh campaign, that flying capability is not going to be as relevant. And besides, if you absolutely need it, if you're dealing with high-end range, then that's where the Praeton comes in for that capability. But usually speaking, you won't need it. Instead, just another unit that's not worth recruiting. For Chaos Warriors, like, really, when you look at these Monogod Fury options and Marauder options, you see a situation in which it's a different discussion completely for Warriors of Chaos because of the recruitment limitations. Whereas for Slaanesh and the other Monogods, just a lot of units that are not worth it, but are obviously added in because it makes sense. So that's kind of the situation we're talking about with regards to these units. Fiends of Slaanesh. So I'm going to put these guys in C tier. And the reason is, here's my perspective on it. On one hand, great unit, sure. But on the flip side, when you look at this unit, you really start to feel the vulnerability that demonic units have. Like, if it wasn't the demonic unit, definitely much higher tier. But the demonic situation, like, when we talk about demonic units, it's not just that a lot of demonic units have less survivability than mortal units, like Chaos Warriors Chosen. It's also the fact that they're demonic, so when they die, they don't run, they disintegrate, and that can hurt you quite a bit in a Slaanesh campaign, especially, early game limited recruitment options. For what it's worth, it's definitely a combat unit that will do rather well, but the downsides of being demonic, the auto-resolve situation, etc., but really the demonic situation is what hurts this unit. Like, if you want fast-moving units as Slaanesh, you have them. They're genuinely going to be better at the job. For what it's worth, Fiends do get the job done, but again, it's more annoying to micro than some other things. Like, that's kind of the aspect of Slaanesh. You do have to micro a lot of things to keep units alive, but I find myself in a situation where if you look at Demonets, for instance, right? Or even Forsaken or other units. But with infantry units, you can at least blob them up, because you'll have a mass of them, you'll have multiple of them, and so each individual unit takes less damage. Not going to work quite as well with cavalry. We're not going to work at all with regards, well, to fast-moving units. Great unit, fantastic animations, but there's severe downsides. Can be worth using, but maybe not too many of them. Like 1 or 2 of them, keep an eye on them, because they can die very, very quickly. They can also be fairly useful, but it is that kind of trade-off. Next up, we have the Chariots of Slaanesh. So we have Seeker Chariots, Hellflayers, Exalted Seeker Chariots. They're all B-tier units. On one hand, it feels kind of heresy to put these chariot units in just B-tier when in reality, they're some of the scariest chariots in the entire freaking game. The sheer amount of damage potential, speed, charge bonus, all the things that make Slaanesh awesome in terms of fast-moving units is on display with them. And on top of that, they have the benefit of having few models per unit. So when you're looking at chariots, you usually don't want to have more than 4 models per unit. I mean, sure, having 1 model per unit, like the motorcycle of Khorne, as I call it, the Blood Shrine of Khorne, is even better because you remove any kind of pathfinding issues with that. But the downside is that even though they do well in terms of dealing damage, in terms of flanking capability, in terms of moving on the battlefield, there is the big downside of these units. They're all demonic units. And again, with demonic units, you have that problem of if they die, they're gone. They won't rout. And that is a pretty big downside when you're looking at it. It means that they're micro-intensive. They're better than Fiends of Slaanesh, I would argue, every single one of them, simply because they're that ridiculously good as charging units, but at the same time, it is that kind of vulnerability. So it is a trade-off that you're going to have to make when you're playing with these chariots, and it is that micro-intensive aspect, which ultimately really means it's not that it's difficult to control them. It means that realistically, as a player, there's only so many of them you can handle on top of having a glass cannon army. So if you're going full on demonettes, unless you're the mask, well, I guess the mask does make up for a lot of demonic unit issues because she gives them that extra durability, which is significant. But all the same, it is a trade-off that you're going to have to make. Then we have Chaos Chariots of Slaanesh, gonna put them in C tier. They're not as ridiculous as Seeker Chariots or Hellflayers, but at the same time, they're not. They have the benefit of not being demonic, so you can rely. So if you get some of these combined with Seeker Chariots, that might be a really good flanking force for your entire army. But yeah, it's just kind of, again, a unit more useful for the sake of Chaos Warriors, but even then, as Chaos Warriors, do you want to get Chaos Knights of Slaanesh, or do you want to get Chaos Chariots of Slaanesh? And I think I know what my answer is on that subject. Then we have the Shrine of Slaanesh, just kind of what-if unit. Sometimes can be nice to have a buff. Then again, you really just want to go in hard and fast and demolish the enemy very quickly because you don't have the sustainability as other races with many of your units, unless we're talking about Chaos Knights and Chaos Warriors and Chosen. See, there's basically 2 big armies that you can make as Slaanesh. You can make a glass cannon army, or you can make a very durable army. The durable army won't have the same punch as the glass cannon army, but all the same. Like, yeah, you can combine a couple of units, but I would personally not combine demonettes, or maybe a couple of them with Chaos Warriors. Help make a big blob, protect all of them. Then we have Heartseekers of Slaanesh. Yeah, A tier unit, just fantastic cavalry. Downside, again, demonic. It's kind of a shame. Like, that's the the iffy part. And I really hope that with 40k Total War, and we all know they're going to do Chaos for that, probably even the first DLC, or maybe a bit later down the line for that, with 40k, that they really improve on the situation with demonic units, because as things currently stand in Total War Warhammer 3, it's not ideal that a lot of demonic units are strong, but then there is the asterisk you have to put with them. It's like they're all demonic units, ergo they have that problem, they disintegrate. And yes, there is a chance of recovering them, but do you really want to rely on RNG to recover them post-battle? And here's the thing, it's very easy to make a Slaanesh army where you end up having to micro each individual unit. And especially if you don't own DLC. So I would recommend being careful about that. Don't overburden yourself, but a couple of these units definitely worth having in your army. Then we have the Snake Riders of Slaanesh, as we call them. Pleasure Seekers of Slaanesh. Anyway, absolutely an S tier unit. One of the best cavalry units in the game, without a doubt. People have talked about like Immortal unit version of it. I think it would be ridiculous. So they do have that downside, but their sheer combat capability makes them freaking phenomenal. Though, then you have Chaos Knights of Slaanesh with lances and regular Chaos Knights. So regular Chaos Knights, durable cavalry, gets into a fight, doesn't get out, can kill a lot of things. That's kind of the role of regular Chaos Knights. Chaos Knights with lances of Slaanesh are one of the best, if not the best, shock cavalry unit in the game. I'm not talking about them being the best cav unit in the game. Far from it. They're not. When you have Skull Crushers, when you have Pleasure Seekers, all that. But in terms of a cav unit that charges behind the line of an enemy army, goes in, does a lot of damage, and gets out without suffering too much damage because Chaos Knights are durable. Well, let's just say Devastating Flanker is a hell of a drug, and they do benefit from that. Then we have Hellstriders of Slaanesh. Yeah, I'm going to say that these guys are F tier, and the problem is they don't do enough damage. Yes, they're fast, sure, but again, just not really a useful unit or unit you want to invest in whatsoever in a Slaaneshi campaign. You have much better options, and even if you can't recruit better options, it's just not worth getting these guys. I'd rather get a bunch of Demonites than get these guys, because again, you can at least blob up Demonites. You can't do that thing for Hellstriders. Then we have Seekers of Slaanesh. So Seekers, I'm going to put them in C tier. I know for some people it's heresy. In fact, I believe this unit used to dominate multiplayer, the multiplayer meta. But campaigns are not multiplayer, and you can't judge things by that metric. Because in multiplayer campaign, because in a multiplayer battle, you don't care about keeping your units alive from battle to battle as long as you win. Whereas in a campaign, your goal is not just to win, but to win with as few casualties as possible, not losing any entire unit. And the problem with Seekers is they don't have enough combat capability, not like Heartseekers or, or the Snakes of Slaanesh. They just don't have that kind of durability and damage capability. They're just not good enough to justify it. Like Chariots, yeah, they're fickle. They can die very quickly. They're even more vulnerable than the Seekers. Sorry, not the Seeker. And then many other units, sure. But the upside of Chariots is when they impact, you feel it, or the enemy feels it. And in fact, that's one of the things that makes Slaanesh so terrifying to face in a campaign situation. It's just like, you can win and potentially suffer very few casualties if you play your cards right when you're fighting against Slaanesh. But similarly, Slaanesh, even under AI control, is the kind of race that can reap a hell of a toll on your armies. But these units are not part of that. Yeah, there's other things that do that role better. Then we have Marauder Horsemen of Slaanesh. Like with other Marauder Horsemen, this is more useful for Warriors of Chaos because of the Warband upgrade system. into cast knights, all that. But their main role is if you want to use a range skirmisher cav unit to harass a portion of the army and get them to chase around, which good luck catching up to Slaanesh units, that is what they can do, and they can do it well. But it is a very situational affair, and more often than not, what you're going to have problems with in the Slaanesh campaigns are not melee units of the enemy. It's going to be their range units and trying to close the gap. And finally, we have the last couple of infantry options for Slaanesh. So first off, we have Devotees of Slaanesh. I'm gonna say that they're C tier. A kind of mediocre melee infantry unit that is neither as durable or as high damage. I mean, they're okay, they'll get the job done, they're not worthless, but they're also not particularly great as a unit. Again, they're okay. Maybe that's enough. They're not horrible, but they're also not really that special from my perspective. Whereas Devotees of Slaanesh with crossbows has a very different situation. So realistically, between their tier requirements and the fact that you really want to close the gap with everything else in your army, their crossbow situation, you don't want to make an entire crossbow army as Slaanesh, let's put it like that. But they can be extremely useful in helping support your army. They're your only real ranged option in a Slaaneshi campaign. They're not really worth it in a Dark Elf campaign, if you're talking about Morathi, but for Slaanesh, they do offer a capability that you don't encounter otherwise. And yeah, mortal units, great stuff. Ranged option, great stuff for demons to have. Very powerful stuff. They're not gonna dominate in terms of range duels, but that's not their role. Their role is to help support the rest of the army. And there's a significant value proposition in not going full on melee if you can avoid it. Like if you look at Khorne, one of the big benefits you can have as Khorne is you can get skull cannons to support your army. You don't have an artillery option as Slaanesh, which is a shame. But that makes these guys even more useful, especially when we're talking about sieges. Maybe allied recruitment with all the vassals you can get as Slaanesh is very important, and it is for those kind of siege options. Slaanesh does really suck in sieges. It's not really a fun playstyle to deal with. Then we have Chaos Warriors of Slaanesh. So Chaos Warriors of Slaanesh 8-tier units, durable units. So unfortunately, you lack a halberd option or a grey weapon version or a dual wield version. Instead, you got Hell Scourges. They're okay. They're great line holders. Hell Scourges because they have poison attacks, certainly so. But it's just not amazing. Like chosen, like Chaos Warriors can be amazing, and every other race has amazing options. You look at Nurgle, you look at Khorne, hell, even look at Tzeentch. The halberds are useful. Hell Scourges are kind of gimmick, if nothing else, and so it's quite a shame. And similar situation goes for Chosen of Slaanesh. Just, yeah, big meatball of units. High durability, decent enough damage, but that lack of armor piercing, lack of anti-large does end up hurting Slaanesh. Makes you reliant on other units. I mean, you have plenty of armor piercing, and never underestimate Exalted Demonites and how much they can tear apart a lot of units in the game. But it would be nice to have that on your principal infantry units as well, as opposed to them just being meat walls. Though I suppose it is very fitting for Slaanesh to just rely on its mortal followers just to hold the line while everyone else gets to have all the fun and games. But yeah, that's where I stand with regards to the Slaaneshi roster. I emphasize a lot of units, especially when we're looking at cav units, chariot units, etc. They can do a lot of damage, but you do have that durability issue, so you have to ask yourself how many glass cannon units do you want in our army, how much are you comfortable micromanaging in an army, as opposed to, just getting it done very, very quickly. And on top of that, we shouldn't ignore the auto-resolve situation. The reason I put Demonettes so highly, by the way, on this list is because Yes, they have all the same damn fucking problems that when you look at Plague Bearers and Bloodletters have in auto-resolve, but when you actually see them in battle, like, they will overrun an enemy army so quickly, and that speed, believe it or not, is a very crucial aspect when we're talking about Demonettes. And one of the reasons I dislike the Chaos Warrior and Chosen options for Slaanesh. Winning battles is all well and good, but do you know how you win battles in the best possible way? Winning them fast. The reason that's important is because morale is determined by balance of power. So if you can do a lot of damage in a very quick period of time, you can rout the enemy, force them to flee the battlefield without having a prolonged engagement that damages your units. And in a campaign where you may want to fight battle to battle to battle, and especially as Slaanesh, when you're looking at Nakari's situation, especially in Ulf 1, having sustainability from battle to battle is important. But when you look at Bloodletters and Plague Bearers, the problem is they suffer in auto-resolve, they don't rout the enemy as much, and they're not Chaos Warriors, suffice to say. Demonettes are certainly not Chaos Warriors, but they will kill things very quickly, especially among the early game units that you will more often encounter when it's relevant in a campaign. Later on, you will have so many vassals, you might not even have many factions to fight. Or if you're fighting someone, you're bringing in a cult army or multiple armies to deal with a specific settlement or specific foe on the battlefield. And that's kind of the power of Slaanesh. It's really the vassalization situation. Early game difficulties, especially as Nakari, then you dominate. Late game, or you just trivialize the rest of the game. And that is definitely a problem in Warhammer 3. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.